No one talks about the back of the knee, not in poems, not in medicine, not in family conversations about aging, and yet it holds stories the rest of the body stopped telling years ago. Folded between yesterday's skin and tomorrow's silence, there's a spot most of us forget, until it starts whispering back. No one talks about the back of the knee, not in poems, not in medicine, not in family conversations about aging, and yet it holds stories the rest of the body stopped telling years ago. Folded between yesterday's skin and tomorrow's silence, there's a spot most of us forget, until it starts whispering back. Huan, the fold where time settles. The body remembers in silence, not through pain, but through the places we stopped noticing. Behind the knee, a crease so ordinary, so tucked into movement, it slowly disappears from our awareness as life grows louder elsewhere. But that fold is not empty. It holds things. It holds salt, humidity, the leftover echoes of walks we once took without effort, and the way knees bent easily into gardens, prayer, laughter. It holds the warmth of uncirculated air, the quiet drip of sweat that never quite escapes, the soft imprint of linen from a bed we've lain in too long. And over time, the skin there begins to change. Not in anger, not in infection, but in invitation. It asks, will you come back here? Will you see me again? Not just when I ache, but when I speak in silence. We often miss it because it doesn't complain. It simply shifts, becomes damp, sensitive, a little musty, a little fragile, a little forgotten. It's not dirty, it's untouched. And when a scent begins to rise, not foul, just unfamiliar, it isn't shame you're smelling. It's the quiet consequence of having skipped over your own body one place too many. This is the grief no one names. The kind that arrives without crisis but settles like dust in the creases where time gathers. You didn't neglect it on purpose, but now that it speaks, you have a choice. Not to fix, not to clean, just to return. 2. The grief of unmapped territories. No one ever mentioned it in the lessons about growing older. No pamphlet, no doctor, no friend at the beauty salon ever said, don't forget the back of your knees. She remembered to moisturize her elbows. She still took time with her face, lifting her chin in the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of memory. Even her heels, cracked and calloused, were tended to, filed, creamed, wrapped in warm socks at night. But the back of her knees, that space had slipped quietly from routine, and because no one asked, she stopped noticing, until one day when her towel brushed that fold and her hand recoiled slightly from the warmth. A little too warm, a little too wet, a scent she didn't recognize, not foul, just foreign. That's when it happened. A grief, small and sudden, bloomed behind her ribcage. Not about health, not about age, about something simpler, a part of herself she didn't know she'd left behind. Not neglected out of carelessness, but out of speed. Out of the way rituals shrink when time grows loud. She looked in the mirror later that day, not for wrinkles, not for hair out of place, but for the woman who once moved without needing a reason to care for herself completely. She couldn't find her, and in that moment she realized this was the quiet grief no one warned her about. Not forgetting who you are, but forgetting where, in your own body, you once lived fully. 3. What the body knows but never says. That small fold behind the knee, it used to be in motion, bending, stretching, rising with playground laughter, kneeling with ease on garden paths. It was a hinge of joy once, a place that creased only when life was happening fast. Now it holds stillness, not because it's broken, but because it's been waiting too long to be part of you again. Inside that fold live nerves called Pacinian corpuscles, tiny pressure sensors that used to hum every time your foot met the ground. They loved movement. They were tuned to rhythm, to flirtation, to barefoot mornings and last dances. But now, they misfire. A brush from your bedsheet feels sharp. A shift in position sends a shiver. Your body doesn't know if it's being touched or startled. This isn't dysfunction, it's disconnection. As collagen thins and hydration quietly fades, the skin doesn't protect less. It speaks more softly. And we stop listening, so it compensates. It sweats from confusion. It itches from stillness. It sends signals not for alarm, but for recognition. Science calls this a sensory mismatch. The body sending signals the brain no longer decodes quite right, but the soul has its own name for it. You haven't visited me here in a while. Because the body doesn't rebel, it remembers, even when you don't, even when you skip that spot in the shower, even when you dry around it quickly, never stopping to ask if it still feels like home. It doesn't want a diagnosis, it wants presence. It wants you to pause, to place a hand there, not to fix it, just to remind that small, forgotten place, I still know you. 4. The midnight ritual no one teaches. In a quiet apartment on the edge of Kyoto, a retired calligrapher wakes most nights around 3:12 a.m. He doesn't set an alarm. His body simply knows. He doesn't reach for tea or a book or even his slippers. He sits on the edge of the bed and bends forward, his spine curved like an old brush in water. And then, with the softest part of his pinky, he touches the back of his knee, where the skin is damp, folded, slightly warm from sleep. He doesn't wipe. He writes. One quiet stroke, then another, a kanji character only he understands, drawn into the thin veil of moisture like ink into memory. He says it's not about art, not anymore. It's where I speak to the parts of me I forgot to thank. He calls it the body's midnight ink, a ritual not of cleanliness but of reverence, because that soft crease, unseen, uncelebrated, is still listening. And each night he answers back with movement so gentle it barely exists to the world. But to him it's everything. A way of saying, I am still present in the places no one else looks. He never talks about this, not to his daughter, not to his nurse. But when asked how he's made peace with aging, he smiles and says, I still have one part of me no one touches but me. And maybe that's all a ritual really is, not repetition, but relationship. A slow, sacred return to a forgotten space that only needs one finger, one moment, one breath to be remembered again. She had thought it was sweat, an annoyance, a crease that trapped the day's warmth and made her self-conscious if someone leaned in too close. She'd tried powders, switched soaps, even blamed the detergent, but nothing really changed, because the problem wasn't odor or moisture, it was distance from herself. That space behind the knee, the fold under her breast, the curve no one sees, had become more than skin. It had become a symbol of how slowly we stop tending to the parts of us that don't make noise. She hadn't neglected it out of carelessness, she'd simply forgotten that it belonged to her. Until one night, half asleep, she pressed a cloth there, not scrubbing, just resting, and something inside her softened, not the skin, the story, because in that moment she didn't feel dirty, she didn't feel old, she felt remembered by herself. The realization didn't hit her like a fact, it moved through her like breath. This spot never needed fixing. It just needed me to return. It wasn't about hygiene, it never had been. It was about dignity, about presence, about reaching back toward a part of her that had waited patiently in silence. To wash it now wasn't routine, it was a whisper, a ritual, a quiet declaration. I still belong to me. Tomorrow morning, as the light rises slowly through the window, let yourself move without rush. Let your hand follow memory instead of routine. When you reach for the towel, pause. Not to dry, not to hurry on, but to place your palm against that hollow behind your knee, the place that never asked for attention, but never stopped carrying you. Feel the warmth, the softness, the slight dampness that doesn't ask to be judged, only noticed. You don't need to clean it. You don't need to fix it. You only need to say, without words, I'm here now. Because what was overlooked was never unloved. It was simply waiting, quietly, patiently, for your return. And now that you're back, you may find that the fold never needed healing. It only needed to be held, even if just once, even if just by you. If your hand has ever landed somewhere on your own body and paused, not from pain, but from memory, a place you hadn't touched in weeks, a fold that carried more than skin, a crease that once held warmth or weight, or someone you loved, you can leave it here. Just a word, a name, a single syllable of return. No need to explain, only to mark that for one quiet moment you noticed again. We'll wait for you there, where the body remembers what the world forgets.